Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Charlotte UNCC Art Department lecture series. This is our last presentation, last guest this semester, so it was an exciting semester, and we are also very happy to have amazing artists to actually finish our series. Annie Lapin is a painter, and I will welcome to UNCC, and I will quickly maybe start with the bio. Annie Lapin was born in Washington, D.C. and lives in Los Angeles. One-person exhibitions of Lapin's work have been presented most recently at the Miles McHenry Gallery in New York City and Shulamit Nazarin Gallery in LA, both galleries representing her. Museum exhibitions include the Weatherspoon Art Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, Santa Barbara Contemporary Arts Forum in Santa Barbara, California, Pasadena Museum of California Art in Pasadena, California, the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the Museo di Capodimonte in Naples, in Italy. Lapin was a recipient of the Folk Visiting Artist Award from Weatherspoon Art Museum in Greensboro. Her work is included in many public collections, including Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Orange County Museum of Art, and the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, High Museum in Atlanta, in Georgia, and again in Weatherspoon in Greensboro, North Carolina. Welcome to Charlotte, North Carolina, UNCC, and we can start.
Okay, hi, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I wish I could actually be in North Carolina because I know it and like it. I'm going to share my screen. Just make sure I'm doing everything right. You can tell me if it's not looking good. All right, well, I'm just going to start off with this image, even though it's at the end, because, well, this is one of my more recent paintings. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go through and kind of get to where this all came from. And I like to start with something slightly more recent, although this is from 2016, and I'd meant to put something from 2021. Can you guys hear the parrots outside? Is it loud?
No, maybe a little bit.
I'm going to close the door because they're really crazy.
They want to be part of it.
Oh my God. Yeah, we have a flock of parrots here.
Well, nice.
Okay, so I'm going to do full screen.
In view?
Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a little bit earlier. So if you know my work, it really deals a lot with landscape and the body, and I'll get into the reasons for that eventually. But what's interesting to me is, just putting together the slideshow today is that landscape and the body was, the beginning of my grad school work. So this is a body of work where, I've always been interested in this kind of sense of what is outside of us and what is constructed by our understanding of the world and our experiences. So nature is kind of a good place for that to be, because it's clearly something that exists outside of humanity, but we have an experience of it that's, partially shaped by our, cultural understanding of it. So I initially, when I was in grad school, I wanted to go out and, I made these photographs of myself and going into nature and, these kind of paintings, they're all about 4 by 6 feet, good grad school size. They are all kind of about, this understanding about recreation and nature, but actually this kind of line between recreation and nature that could actually be a little bit more about the breakdown of that, of using nature and then being possibly in a more vulnerable space in nature, which might be the true state of being in nature, but it's hard. It doesn't come very often. And it all came because I was almost attacked and mauled by a bear, and it really affected my understanding of recreation and nature. But anyway, going forward, I began to feel like those paintings in grad school were just, to describe this understanding of what is constructed and what is, what's actually there. I felt like maybe I realized that painting had so much potential to talk about, construction of vision in and of itself. So I started to just play with images that weren't from anything in particular, but I was developing the images through starting with an abstraction and then finding the image. So it was really like these Rorschachs, like often like a lot of stippling. And then within that, I would find, a figure usually in nature. And it was just kind of like this development of something over time, and the painting would kind of reveal itself to me in terms of like whatever the humans were doing inside of the nature. And I wanted each painting to feel like you were coming upon something that you didn't understand. So, I mean, this looks more understandable, I guess. I think this was based on my feeling about art boys and their domination of the art world in LA at the time. So this is still my grad school work. These are smaller pieces. I've always been really interested in the formats that we understand painting through. So this is a small piece. I often think about what a small piece communicates, whether it's like relating to, small icon paintings or conversation pieces where there's like a group of people and you're just supposed to watch it and look at it and see that they're doing something in a smaller piece. These are all about like that big. That is like maybe 16 by 20. And these are all similar. All of these were based on just finding the image through making this kind of stippling that you can see in this area here. It's like starting off the painting with just like a kind of a mess. And then the figure would kind of almost develop like a photograph for me. And I'm sure that my experience painting from photography, like, did create this black and white, the type of chiaroscuro that you see in photography. So yeah, that's how these arose. This one's a very big diptych that's like, for me, it's like kind of connecting. I was thinking about it connecting to historical painting, which are very large scale paintings from like the 1800s or 1700s, where something, grand is happening or mythological. And this was like this weird, I felt this sense of just being in this very odd platform, being an artist, as I was coming out of grad school. For me, I wasn't comfortable being like a person who like throws their heart into the world and they're just being watched and judged and being on a platform. So that was me. This is just one of those allegorical things. I think the work was kind of, in some ways, even though it was a flow of consciousness based often on these kind of messes that I would make on the canvas, there was a sense of either everything being almost like a play or on a stage. Sometimes it was just people in nature. And I've always been interested in this kind of back and forth between spaces and types of spaces. So this kind of iconic space where there's this like larger flat, central flat image facing the viewer versus this more classical depth. And to have those two combined for me is very interesting, because it's like this duality of how we experience reality in some ways. There's so many different types of understanding of history and other people in the world. So one is a lot more kind of like symbolic, I guess, and maybe that is like this kind of iconographic space. And then there's the one that we think is rational, but it's also symbolic, which is this perspectival space. And then I wanted to be doing this kind of this space shifting in an actual three-dimensional space. I wanted to have like a space that you could walk through and experience some type of flat space as you're moving and have it change. So I was really lucky enough to get invited to do this right after grad school. Didn't know what I was doing. And again, had people, you can see the stippling that I like used at the time to interpret and then kind of have this Rorschach development. And, you know, I think coming out of grad school, it's odd to be just talking into a computer. I've never really done this before. My lectures are always kind of confessional and like explaining that I had so much anxiety throughout this whole process of growing up as an artist. So this kind of stippling, you know, it's very similar to what I do now in some ways. And so the work that came out of this, you know, in some ways now I look back and I'm like, oh, these are interesting. I like these paintings and this kind of the simplicity of the flat images, although there's some stuff sticking out of them. And these odd little forms in nature, but that wasn't enough for me. I mean, of course, my goal was to create this like three-dimensional experience, which was very hard to do in this time span that I had. So I was very disappointed in this kind of mural that I made, which now I'm like, well, that's a good mural. But so it was important for me to like move into the main space. So I started tearing everything down and repainting and creating this kind of like floor experience. And, you know, it is, what can I say about it? I learned a lot about it, but it also kind of, you know, being alone in this space, I had like a whole month to just work in here and then experience people coming in. And I really became even more interested in this idea of the ritual of being in a space and the ritual potential of the space and the ritual of making the art. So the work, you know, after this is really connected to maybe the forms of ritualism and performance spaces, but this one is in like a more Arcadian space. And this is a kind of a strange ritual and the abstract kind of elements of ritual and forms of people. But so when I made this painting, I think my dad and maybe some people, and often I had a lot of figures in nature. So, and they were meant to be nondescript, like kind of just like these kind of archetypal figures. But somebody said, and I think it was my dad, who was like, oh, are those Native Americans? And I said, no. And suddenly I realized that like all of these people in nature, not all of them, and not in this piece, I think, but there were moments where it appeared that I was depicting some type of like, because the figures were so nondescript, I really hated the misinterpretation of them as this, like, you know, some kind of culture that actually exists that, you know, whether it's Native American or something else, I just felt like it was like, just not something that I felt comfortable depicting and having the work be about, even if it was a misinterpretation. So I really tried to figure out how to make the work much more clearly about like the construction of seeing. And so I didn't know what to make anymore. So I started to dig into history as this kind of like material and using much more kind of specific art historical light and spaces, you know, art historical landscape, and kind of getting rid of the figures actually for a time. So these figures that were arriving during this time were in some ways like more cartoony or silly and emerging out of the landscape in a much more non-distinct way and not actually being like characters in the landscape, but much more like a combination of the landscape and the figure. And then that kind of interest in this art historical morphed into, so this is my first show after this period. And this is a show where I decided to like distill. So as much as like our experience of nature is kind of this weird distilled construction, I think our experience of art historical is also that. And I started to think about like the art historical in terms of, oh my gosh, how do I turn off these things? In terms of flavors, or almost like a memory of a flavor or a memory of something that can be non-distinct. And so I wanted to take that and have it become embodied on the canvas. So a lot of these are like, and there's almost like a mystical kind of separation of these things, and almost like approaching this art historical landscape as a source for something mystical. Not that I necessarily believe that, but in this kind of world of creating the show, I began to think about the art historical as a source that you could kind of divvy up, like, okay, the sky element, this is the sky element, and this is the leaf body element that's like between, and this is the ground element. Then there was kind of like the element of the material and like breathing life into the material. This show is called The Pure Space Animate. And this, all of these were kind of meant to be like, I guess it's like a spirit of the historical, but our understanding of that kind of like Rococo or like kind of almost cliched romantic landscape, kind of trying to find the primal actor in that, because it's like this thing that we've digested and we think is basically lifeless in certain ways. I mean, they're beautiful paintings, but you look at it and you think, oh, that's a real cliche. And I wanted to refine kind of the primal deep thing within our impulse to make those things and within our understanding of those art historical paintings, like a spirit or something, that would be in. So obviously this is very referential to Mesoamerican masks. And this is more complicated in terms of like thinking about the rocks that are ground up to create these colors and then trying to reconstitute them on the side. This is kind of like a different experience, like just thinking about paint and I'm playing with these ideas. And then this was kind of another kind of take on that kind of essence of a portrait. And then eventually after that show, The Pure Space Animate, I began to say, okay, well, these objects that are in the space, the paintings, are performers for the people. They're kind of like, okay, they contain this thing that I was interested in distilling, which you could say is a spirit or whatever. Maybe they're containers in the sense that like, a sculpture, a fetish sculpture is a container for some type of, God. And for us, the art viewers in Western society, maybe our interest in history means that we're subconsciously putting a sort of God into the paintings, and a made up God that is just the God of, the landscape or whatever we believe in, the myth of the landscape, let's call it. So I began to kind of use photography of performance art and kind of combine that with the landscapes. So the photography would get subsumed, but there would still be like this figure kind of coming out of the landscape. Sometimes not like a human figure. These are all about 4 by 5. I go through quickly and I don't have names. If you look at my names, they're all like punny, strange plays on language in the same way I'm trying to play with space. And I don't remember any of the names, and I just go through quickly because I feel like there's something about like the mass of image that helps you understand a language. So I've just tried to get through lots of images. These are all about human size. I feel like they're like a mirror, like a good like 4 foot by 5 foot, 5 foot tall thing, so that you can kind of feel like you're relating to the body that's coming out of it. So this is another one. Got very romantic-y happening. And I think I was refining to kind of like some of the colors in the landscape and just allowing it to be even more about this kind of clear sense of a romantic landscape. Sorry, it goes kind of fast. And there were still figures coming out of it. These are slightly smaller. That's why this one looks more like a head, because it's like maybe a head size painting. So this is in 2013, my last show in this body of work, because I felt kind of done with it. I mean, part of it also is that, I have a lot of ideas about like what I'm interested in, and the way I pursued this body of work, you know, it was all in service of trying to unlock this sense of what I'm always interested in kind of breaking things down in terms of like having the viewer be like, well, why do I see this? And why do I see that? And so there are moments where like things kind of emerge and you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Do I see that? Or why do I see a landscape? I think I was interested and I wanted people to look at these things and say, well, why do I see a landscape here? Because this isn't a landscape. But the interpretation ultimately with this body of work always comes down to kind of like beautiful abstract landscapes, which wasn't satisfying for me. So, I mean, I'm just finishing this body of work, and then there were some of these kind of essence of portraitures happening, kind of, again, like these are about 4 foot round pieces. So yeah, so then I did that show, and I couldn't do it anymore. I kind of always got to this breaking point where I felt like, okay, the work was not doing what I wanted it to do. And, you know, kind of decided to just take a break and make collage and really just kind of find, I had also been teaching at the time, and teaching really taught me that the artists that I admired the most had found something strange, but pursued it to the point where they had then developed a language that had just very individual, and why were they doing it, but it was so specific that you bought into it. So I just needed to loosen up and stop, like, you know, I felt like I was tied to this intellectualism that was like driving me into these like maybe easy paths for me in terms of like just referencing certain things that weren't like weird enough. So I was just playing with landscape and cutting things out of, because like romantic painting is interesting to me, not just because it's like historical, but also because that's like our view of nature often. Like it affects our, maybe it's just, it affects, you know, all advertising. It's just like inundating our life. Like, so I would just use a lot of travel and leisure magazines to just get the initial image and just start, you know, making constructions on top of that, abstractions, and just playing. I think I did hundreds of these. And then for some reason, this was like the form that I decided would be the right form to pursue, like wholeheartedly. So I decided to make a show that was like based on that form, and actually parts of this image. So I combined those 2 images to make a show that looked like this. And all of these are about 8 feet tall. You know, I was just pursuing some techniques that I had developed and wanted to just continue them. And this body of work, you know, I also was just trying to back away from this idea of, you know, an abstracted landscape, but break down ideas of the push and pull of space, talk about landscape in a way that was a little bit more like framed, and then, you know, trying to help you understand your own perspective of the landscape, and like landscape and art historical as a language, and kind of equating it to symbolism, and using these kind of bits of letters. And then the paint is much more kind of like, it's both architectural but abstract, and then peeling off the page and sitting there in a weird kind of tenuous way. So these were all 8 feet, no, sorry, 7 feet tall. And I guess I was trying to have things also look like they were peeling off the canvas. And so I painted the canvas to look like canvas color. And I was interested in this kind of like illusion of the paint being illusion, like even more of an illusion than usual. So some of these things look like they're coming off of the canvas. And then sometimes I was just making some odd kind of metaphysical looking things there. These are all same height. This one's a small one though. Yeah, but so like they all came together in this space to kind of look like an architecture in some ways, because they were all the same height except for this smaller one. And you know, some people like this and some people are like, you're crazy, this could be the worst thing ever or the best thing ever, we don't know. So it was interesting to change and then have people really react strongly. But I was excited about that because previously people were like, oh, these paintings are so pretty. And then now there, some people thought that, but then some people were like, what is this? And for me, that was really good because I was tired of people just thinking the paintings were pretty. So after that, I felt like I really achieved something making this body of work, and I was 34 and I was told that I could go have a baby now. So I did. I got pregnant. And then I started working with charcoal because I thought, oh, well, that'll be less toxic because they had a lot of solvents in there. But I was throwing charcoal and quickly I realized that that was also toxic, although I had a mask, but it was everywhere in my studio. But I was throwing the charcoal, fixing it, and then trying to kind of create a space and an atmosphere around the charcoal using acrylic paint mostly. And these are all like, in fact, part of the reason why I was making the charcoal is because I was, interested. I saw the charcoal on the canvas as this kind of like cave wall experience. And I wanted to really get into this idea of allowing myself to, well, I was also like, what's really fundamental? Like, what's the most fundamental thing that humans do when they make art? And I was thinking about cave paintings and that Werner Herzog movie, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, where he talks about the shadows on the wall being, basically just interpreted by the cave painters, and the way that they would find, the images that are in their lives on the cave wall just by looking at the shadows, so that the figures emerge out of the shadows. So that's something I naturally had done, but I'd always felt like a little bit of shame about because I didn't understand it. I wasn't comfortable just being instinctive. But so now I was just not going to be uncomfortable being instinctive. So I started using charcoal as this cave wall, and finding forms and figures and just kind of really wanting to let my mind be the driver, maybe my subconscious mind. I wanted to let that be the driver for a while to continue to kind of find something a bit more individual rather than kind of what I felt was still regurgitating, this thoughts about art historical material. So I started using mica too, which I'm sure is terrible for you, and throwing that on there. And so then that resulted, after I had my child, I was trying to throw paint charcoal less and pour it. So I began pouring it onto the canvas. And this is about 8 feet wide by 6 feet tall. And this body of work was very thin. It was all acrylic. I was not using oil very much. And I was using tape, but I actually decided I would just go into the studio and use tape. And then occasionally I would like that tape. So then in this painting, I painted the tape on. And this is 2016. So was it 20? No, this is 2015. 2014. This is 2014, 2015. And I was just, I was interested to see what the world was that was kind of automatic to me. So it's almost like these are automatic paintings. I mean, there's something kind of primeval, I think, in the figures. And I think it relates to modernism, quite a bit, and landscape still. And these were so thin, it was just like charcoal washes and like a little bit of airbrush, because I didn't know how to use airbrush, but I decided to start using it because I liked these charcoal and I wanted these charcoal pours and I wanted to give them a real sense that of kind of concrete stone. And in order to paint around them and give them that development, the only media that I could use was charcoal. Like spray airbrush, because there was a similar granulation of the way that the airbrush particles fell on the canvas as the charcoal particles fell on the canvas. But it's, this is such a early moment for these paintings. when I started, and also just like a learning curve of airbrush, and I would like drawings really. So I had that show then. I didn't feel comfortable showing this work at all, but I did anyway. And it was like 2015 or maybe 2014. And, you know, it was definitely an odd break for me. You know, I think that was a weird show. And it was a moment where I was showing stuff that wasn't fully developed. So I had some interesting emotional stuff happening for me about that. But then for the next show, 2016, I continued to develop it. Like I knew this body of work, I knew it wanted to be this. So this is kind of where I got after I was able to really spend some time with the work. Also, I think, you know, having a kid and having much more of a, less of a studio, like insane life where I was just there 7 days a week. I had to then have weekends so that I could be a mom and work, you know, come home at night and after daycare and just be around, but I could still work at night at home on the computer. So the computer became a big part of shaping these canvases. I would take a photo of the pour and then I would go to the computer and like develop it on the computer, take part of that picture, paint it. And then, so this show is really kind of like laying over the charcoal, the pours of charcoal, reacting to it, continuing this kind of abstraction, but also developing these spaces as, you know, having lots of different parts and images that are arising because I'm having a Rorschach, you know, thought, but it happens very slowly. So the Rorschach, you know, thought that we have when we see like a spill will happen immediately. For me, I would have a much slower process that would, you know, include many drafts of what's possible on the computer. And for this body of work, each of these is a bit different. They're not meant to be like the same, although they're made out of the same material. So sometimes they actually seem to reference like more of like a cartoon world or a art historical world. I kind of wanted the whole, instead of just kind of referencing art history, I was interested for this body of work referencing lots of different things. And I think that's still the case, although art history is creeping in. This is the next show in 2018. Still kind of developing this language. I was pregnant again, so that was, you know, you know, there's, when you're pregnant, you're a little distracted. So I was, you know, still finding my footing with this body of work, finding ways to work in the studio where I was completely not getting any toxic stuff on me. I started using, so the work became really open. I started allowing myself to use anything that occurred to me within the realm of responding to the initial pours on the canvas, on the linen. So, you know, at a certain point, I wanted to, you know, I've always wanted to use my face as a smush on the canvas. So I tried to do that, didn't work. Then I had to like develop a smush that I could actually put on a piece of paper and then create a silk screen of. So I finally made this, which has a similar stippling to this, which is this is a silk screen. And I was just interested in that as a kind of a form of another type of accident. These pours are like these accidents that happen, but then they became very concrete and similar with history in a way. Like I have always thought about history as this like organic spill that happens, but then we look at it and we have this kind of reifying way of retelling it, sometimes slightly mythologized, and then that kind of takes on this kind of like concrete symbolic form, the same way I want these pours to have this concrete symbolic form, in the same way that like my face is like a certain kind of accident of history. Okay, so then, yeah, this body of work, similar figures in the landscape, a lot of abstraction, and I think there's lots of references to modernism in terms of like the sculptural forms that are coming out, but also kind of like relief sculptures that are more like historical or even ancient. And then I had my last show I think this is my last. So this was the last, this body of work is 2018. And then this next body of work was 2019. And the pores I started, oh, sorry, that is not in the right place. This is very recent. This is like 2021, but whatever, it's all part of the same thing, kind of ending it all up. This last bit of lecture is just kind of getting to the point where the pores are now in color. They continue to have forms. I think that there's a lot of, they're communicating some of the earlier ideas that I had about, like, maybe not ideas, but just some of the gestures of intensity that were in my earliest work. There's a lot of a sense of your eyes playing tricks, and that's something I've always been after. The work can kind of contain anything I want. This piece, for example, like, you know, if I see something, I put it in. It's just a lot cleaner version of that, because before, and this is all charcoal and, you know, mica thrown onto the canvas, they take a really long time to develop. I want them to feel like they were always meant to be the way they are, and very kind of, so there's a bit more graphic, hard lines, less painting over. I'm not like kind of making this very thick mess unless I'm intentionally doing that. Like in this little area, there's kind of rocks and glittery things mixed into this paint to make it textural, just like this is textural. And then there's this odd kind of ecstatic face looking up. So this one is allowed to have everything. This one's more simplified, but it's another 8 foot. These are very big, 8 foot by 6 foot paintings, or 6 foot by 8 foot. Yeah, and so just incorporating the accidents of the roller marks, and having those become a part of the abstract language, sometimes becoming a body in space, sometimes becoming really convoluted. And then I think with this piece, I really started to think more about really getting the body to be a part of the overall landscape, and I just really enjoyed that one. And yeah, so then just like they're very collagey sometimes, and they're really about like windows and looking through and different textures, but having them all kind of operate in some sort of world or narrative together. And then the pour is just this kind of initial accident that becomes this very concrete, intentionalized object by the way it becomes contextualized by the paint. And I do, you know, hundreds of drawings on the computer before I and each time I'm do any part of the painting, for example, like I would paint this sky or part of the sky, probably painted this part of the sky without this kind of jutting out situation. Painted this based on initial photos, did not think it was working enough, like I needed to keep going. So, you know, started to, this was not black initially, this was just more of this stuff, but, you know, in order to create this kind of moving in and out, a sense of like an object and space that felt like you could walk into it, but also made sense in terms of the composition of an object. The pieces just kind of go through a lot of different iterations like that. And yeah, I'm just really kind of allowing myself to use the art historical to even create like a feeling. And yeah, my newest work is a little more dark than this, but I don't really have images of it. So that's it. I think I can stop my lecture.
Thank you, Annie. Really fascinating presentation, and actually makes me want to go to studio right away. I think it's
good.
One of those good feelings one have, like, okay, let's do something. Although I don't think I feel kind of in a similar way about the Neo Rauch work. I don't know if you know Neo Rauch.
Yeah.
there's some similarities in terms of maybe color some places and maybe some imaginary landscapes, but that's my favorite painter. But
oh, cool. Yeah, no, it's great.
I really love your work. And before I actually will switch to students' question, I have a question which kind of is a general question about the painting. Looking at your work, looking at your paintings and your evolution, inspired me to think about, the kind of ongoing. Every so often we hear about the idea that the painting is dead, right? That we are moving towards technology and a lot of different media, time-based work. The recent sale of NFT work, the $69 million for a actually not very, in my opinion, not very good piece of computer work, inspire a lot of people to kind of go back to this debate about where is the traditional studio work and the kind of slow arts. Your work kind of, reinforced my perception of the painting is doing great. What do you think about that, though? What do you think about those statements and the kind of constant barrage of comments about old media, new media? And
yeah, I mean, in some ways it kind of traces my own anxieties about it, as I've been a painter. Like I went to grad school and I'm like, why am I doing this? I didn't know anybody who's an artist. Like, what am I doing? I guess, who knows? What am I doing? I'm just going to do this. And then just, constantly being like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, who does this? Because that's just, my family was not in the art world. And then, then you have like grad school, which is like, making you question, like, why are you even painting? And some people who are like in those fields, like, new genres or something, would say, oh, I used to paint, like, that's really cool painting. I can do that if I wanted to, but I don't, because why would you? So there's a lot of anxiety and self-doubt in that. And, that, I think at a certain point, though, those are interesting conversations that, it's a very good question. And I have to like try to be clear, because I do have an answer, but I haven't verbalized it in myself. The conversation about whether something is dead or alive is, it's an interesting, fun conversation, but I think I've learned, if it's an interesting metaphysical conversation that's a little too big for its britches, right? Like, painting exists because people want to do it, and it exists because people want to buy it. It doesn't exist because it has a right or a reason to exist. And so it's a little bit less, it's a little more simple, than this kind of idea of like, after Auschwitz, like, there can be no art or something like that. Those are interesting, big conversations, but they don't really pan out. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not important, but how does art have to change in response to things? And I think the unfortunate thing is that we are living in a moment, the grossest part of this moment is that the dominant conversation around art is how valuable it is, and how, I don't hear a lot of, there's not as much of a interesting criticism, and much more of, just like a constant bluster about like, what is the value on a monetary level of things, and then things that are, not that good, they become famous because they're so hyper speculated. And it's a really gross situation. Like, it's hard as a young artist to even think about like capitalism as it relates to what you do, but that is a part of, just having to deal with art and being an artist on some level. But you also have to put your head down and ignore it. And so the NFT thing is just a continuation of that total grossness, like this kind of like conspicuous consumption by people who have way too much money. In my opinion, it's like, I don't mean to have I'm interested in what other people have to say. So as an artist, if you can take advantage of, it's hard to make a living as an artist. I do not begrudge people who who decide to take advantage of it and say, okay, well, if you want to buy this stupid thing that really is worthless, you can give me some money if somebody wants to do that. But to be interested in it as a real like movement forward for art is totally disingenuous. I mean, it's or stupid, and you're going to make bad art. I mean, none of those artworks are good or important. What's important about it is just that the sign that is showing so disgusting about our society, that people have that much money to put into something that's ultimately just worthless.
Mm-hmm.
Except the money goes to artists. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of mercantile culture.
Mm-hmm.
Question from Ryan, which I will try to kind of explore a little more. Where did you get the idea to do multiple overlays to convey sense of complexity in the way you have done it? And you actually touch on this when you mentioned those the moment when you kind of switched from the series of initial paintings to the collage series, and you said I made hundreds of those. Would you talk about how maybe the process and actually engaging in producing the work informs your work and allows you to develop not only as intellectual speculation, as you can imagine, what would you like to project on the canvas, but also the process itself of actually making things and discovering them as you're making?
Yeah, so I previously, my earlier work that was more like, luscious, kind of strokey, romantic painting, those usually were painted over and over and over and over again until I found the right thing. So it was kind of like I was already using the first layer of the painting as a Rorschach to then paint more and change the sky to become like a body or this or that. And then that became too messy and confusing. And so when I started working on these more collagey things, it allowed me to kind of push the space to be what I wanted it to be, because I'm always interested in the way I want to create flux. Like I want this flux of the sky becoming something that's flat or something that's deep in the same painting, and both. And so collage helped do that a little bit, because you can kind of like take a ready-made image, which I felt like I was already doing. Like I felt like when I was making my romantic paintings, I was using ready-made imagery, even though it was from my mind and like kind of like an art historical index, it was ready-made. So I just started using like photos to do the collages. Then I had that body of work, and then I started working on the computer in response. And so that I really do think about the images that I then collect and put onto the computer collage as like, I think about, using the archive of the internet as like a further space of my mind. Like the internet is kind of like this extension of my brain when I'm having a Rorschach interaction with the initial pours or like a certain state of painting. So it is different spaces, because I'll just be like, oh, like that looks like it could be a forest behind these people, and that would help that body kind of come forward. So I'll search like forest, but I'll have in my mind like something specific that I want, and I'll have to search for that specific thing. And then I use like elements of that, or sometimes I'm taking photographs of my own body, or taking photographs of this or that, because I'm like, I have this in my mind, but I need to have a reference for it. Whereas in the past, I didn't have a reference. So the process of creating totally different spaces is, it's two things. It's one, I'm interested in that idea of like this constant shift and constant flux. And two, it's out of the way that my mind will say, I need this thing, and I have to find a concrete representation of it. So I use the internet, and that's how I get these different things on the canvas. Mm-hmm. If that's helpful.
Great. This is a question from Amber. It's a little bit longer, but it's actually interesting problem itself. Your consistent inclusion of scenes of nature in your work, which is about vision and perception, reminds me of the studies that have shown that time spent observing nature actually improves our eyesight. One study in particular found that children in Sydney, Australia, had eyesight that is 10 times better than the eyesight of children in Singapore. The eyesight of the parents of the both groups of children are very similar. The children in Sydney spend 14 hours a week playing outside, while children in Singapore spend only 3 hours. Does this correlate at all with your subject matter? And I just want to mention that in your, especially in the all your paintings, but especially in the last one, there is this kind of element of the two-dimensional quality of the shapes, which are kind of have a limited depth, and some vistas, so some kind of perspective. And I find Amber's question interesting in that context. How do you? And it's actually very true. Our culture actually forcing us to be much more limited in our vision, because we are hunter-gatherers. We're supposed to be outside and look at the horizon constantly. We're not doing that anymore. Most of us never actually see horizon during the day.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, that's such an interesting idea that our eyes work better if we have more time to spend in nature. I mean, that's so interesting to me. I'm gonna definitely, thank you for saying that. You know, I do think a lot about trying to create an image that's going to feel like it's moving for the viewer, because I think that is a part of our life that is missing. And there's something in that, you know, there's almost like I'm giving, you know, unfortunately, it's probably, if it gets bought, it's going to be somebody who's wealthy or something. But it's like, I'm trying to create almost like a supplement to our total lack of in connection to nature. And, you know, instead of just painting a surface that looks like trees and stuff like that, I do want to create that kind of shifting, moving thing that will kind of unfold the way that nature does, the complexity that nature has. It's like kind of a impossible goal, but it's kind of a ideological, you know, hope that I have. But also, yeah, I mean, that I really am interested in nature as a, you know, something to improve life. So if you can have it on your wall and have it feel like it's moving, and part of it is like that, the staticness of some of the images in relationship to sometimes the blur of the nature, or the blur of the sky, or the movement of the leaves. I think it pushes those things to have more of a sense of movement and more of a sense of space by having these things in the front. So I find that satisfying in the sense that it makes me feel more connected to nature in the work. And now I feel like I'm losing the train of thought, but I thought that was a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Question which may be relating more to the form itself. This is a question from Matt. It's not too often I see prolific use of enamel spray. What do you like and dislike about using enamel spray in your pieces? I mean, in my observation, you know, there is this kind of classical romantic approach to the medium when you, especially early work, when you do the more classical landscape paintings. But then there's kind of more contemporary use of spray, like a street culture, urban quality of the line making, of the drawing through with the spray or letters, stuff like that. What is your fascination with this relation between the oil and spray or other medium?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's something like, maybe it goes back to the last question, which is that when you have this kind of juxtaposition between something that is naturalistic, like just like the kind of, there is, I mean, we look at a lot of these romantic paintings and you kind of, you know, they seem digested and boring, but there is like a magic to the light that has been created. And I think sometimes by juxtaposing a different technique next to that, it brings it more into life, the flatness of those other techniques. It kind of brings to life they kind of complement each other. And similarly, you know, the flatness of the front, once you give it a bunch of depth and kind of life behind it, it also kind of takes on more of a like a concrete form. And so like I am interested in those kind of pores as this kind of concrete sculptural thing, when it's gray, you know, and sometimes it's, you know, a color and that could still have a concrete. And yeah, maybe there's a connection to, I just think it's connected to more like modernism and kind of color field theories and stuff like that. And the spray is just a way to get like a hard graphic gradient sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Nicole. I noticed in your bio on your website, you said there is no room for mistakes. So when a mistake happens on the canvas, if it can be made into something else, I can keep the work. Otherwise, it's a loss and I have to start again. have you found that some mistakes have turned artwork into something new and exciting?
Yeah, I mean, now in a lot of ways, the work can recover from mistakes a lot. Although, and I think also that part of it is that I've kind of learned that there are ways that you can chunk up a canvas and push it and do too much. And then especially if you use oil, I can't paint over oil. So I have like all these techniques now for keeping things flat so that I can repaint them if I need to in certain areas. Or for example, I think some of the magic of the painting like lies in the revelation of the canvas in certain areas. And a bad mistake would be like, I cover so much of it up that the whole thing just feels plastic and you can't see through it anymore. And that happens sometimes. And I don't know how to recover from it. So I do have to throw them away, but then there's plenty of times where like I do a mistake. And I mean, I could show you in like a piece, but I feel like we don't have enough time for that. But I could like just show examples of, I mean, there's mistakes all the time. Sometimes there's a drip and I like it, or yeah, I guess I could show, let's go to my other lecture that I just had open. Okay, well, now I can't do it. Oh, here we go. Here, let's find a mistake. Well, like the pores are mistakes, but here I think, you know, this is not a good example. Okay, this one I felt was looking terrible for a very long time because it was very static.
We're not seeing it.
Oh, you can't. Okay,
Oh.
how do I gotta get out of here. For some reason, I thought I was sharing. Okay, let me share my screen. Can I share my screen? Okay.
Yeah, should be able to.
Here we go. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one, you know, lived on my wall for a very long time, and I really hated it because it was very chunked up. And then somehow I figured out how to create a movement where this was connected all the way to this. And then other mistakes, like this one, this painting, all of them lived for a really long time. Like this painting had a totally different composition on it, and it was just very boring. And I don't think it was a mistake, but I had to just live with something that I felt like was a failure forever until I finally did this. And I'm not really sure how I could do it, but like more mistakes. This one, definitely, everything in here is a giant mistake, but I let it happen and I just kept going, which is why it looks the way it does. Sometime now, maybe I would throw that painting away. But this one also has a lot of, like this, I think I started to pour some stuff here and it started to drip. And instead of being like, okay, that's bad, what do I see? It becomes another Rorschach. So that's how those mistakes kind of become something else. And I will stop sharing so that we can ask another question.
As you mentioned that at the very moment about the time and kind of coming back and working on the painting again, and in many questions the question of time was coming out. How long it takes you to make an image, you know, related to the size, complexity, new form, how the painting evolved over, you know, one session or multiple sessions over the years?
Yeah, so some of the paintings early on took a few years to make. Like I'm going to share one more time just because you can see how some of them take a long time and some of them don't. So like this one was sitting in my studio forever. Did not know how to make it become something. And this one probably took like a few months, but I'm not like working on it the whole time. I'm kind of staring at it while I work on other ones. And usually a whole body of work will come together at the same time. So the paintings kind of complement each other. This one happened in a week. I made this whole painting in 1 week. I don't know why that happened so quickly. This one happened and, you know, it took a longer time. Let me see. This one obviously is very small, so it took no time, probably maybe a day. This one took a couple days because it's also 18 inches by 23 inches. This one sat in the studio. Actually, I went to a gallery and came back to the studio and I worked on it some more, which I kind of want to do with some of my earlier pieces. This one, again, probably, this took a few months to figure it out. This one took probably a year to figure this one out, partly because like I'll do something and I'll be like, that's so dumb. Why did I do that? And I have to put it away. And then like 3 months later, I'll look at it and I'll say, why did I think that was so dumb? So that sometimes you need to remove yourself from your decisions and look at it. And this one happened pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, more recently things are moving slightly faster, but this one sat around. There was a whole underpainting here that I just didn't know what to do with forever. So sometimes they just take a really long time of processing.
So obviously you have a number of paintings in the process in the same time, like there was extensive.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, like right now I have probably like 6 paintings that are like really in process. They look kind of good, but they are also, I have to make another one to know what to do with. In some ways, they're always like looking at each other and kind of developing them all at the same time, so that they're all at the same kind of level of reality. It takes a long time though. It takes me right now I'm averaging like 20 paintings a year, which is actually not very much for among my peers in this, if I'm just trying to make a living this way.
Right. Maybe the last question, which this question was coming from many students, how one becomes a studio artist. I mean, it's a difficult decision. It's a difficult life choice, obviously economical, but also somehow level mental. How would you advise young aspiring artist students to navigate, strategically to become a studio artist? How difficult it is? What was your own evolution to get to this point?
Yeah. Okay. So it's extremely difficult. And a lot of it has to do with, it's a little bit about luck, but really to be very strategic about it, which I wasn't. I was just so lucky. I think for me, I was just lucky, but I understand now like how to be strategic, which is one, if you can, don't pay for grad school, but you might want to go to grad school, but try to find a grad school where you don't have to go into too much debt, because it's that's a lot of, I don't know, there's just so much risk involved. Because it's a career that really often just doesn't go anywhere. And I know a lot of artists who are great artists who just cannot sell a painting, or artists who have had great careers and now can't sell a painting. So starting your career out with debt is very, it sucks to have to do that. And then the second part of it is being aware that, that the market is, even if you get successful, the market is just like, you're just lucky because the market is just like certain things, what the market does like. You have to pay attention to the market a little bit. You should, as an artist, not pay attention to the market, but you have to understand that if the market is going to make you successful, realize what the market is. This is so complicated. I feel like I'm just rambling, but realize what the market is, which is unfortunately the thing that gives you money as an artist. And the market wants certain things. And some people can tailor their lives and their careers to be aware of what the market wants. And I think they can still make authentic work. I'm not somebody who is very good at that. But I am aware of what is seductive, and I'm interested in that. But there's plenty of people who make great paintings and do well in the market who don't care about what is seductive. So, I'm lucky in that seductive painting is appealing to me, and that I want to make something that really has like a finish and a polish. And, I'm not doing it for the market, but I also know that that's like something that's kind of the market finds interesting. You just have to be aware of what the market is, and that's how you can. And then, the part of being aware of what the market is also realizing the market sucks. Like I always have a backup career. Like I'm always kind of like, I cannot make my work for the market. And I'm not going to be destroyed if the market doesn't like me. Although at points I have felt that way because it's confusing. You wrap up your success and your ability to continue to be a professional artist. If once you start, you feel like that's important. So I would always have a backup career is my thing, and even have like a little thing is going on so that you don't have to rely on the market is really the thing, because the market isn't really it doesn't reward good art. So you could be making great art and the market wouldn't reward it. So I don't really know what the formula is for becoming a professional artist, but the steps can be understanding what the market is, maybe figuring out what you do, and then pushing yourself to really perfect it, because that is important in terms of just even your audience, like really investing in some odd thing that you do. So you go down this rabbit hole of yourself and make your work that way. And then just figure out a way to not live your life hoping that the market will find you, or just be like, I'm going to do this thing strategically this way or that way. Whether you're meeting galleries or you're going to a grad school that's in a major city, that's probably like a strategic decision to make, where you're going to a grad school in or around New York City or in or around Los Angeles, which is where the most galleries are. But it doesn't mean that you can't also live in or go to a grad school. You know, maybe there's much more of a market growing in places like North Carolina that I'm not that aware of. I mean, because that's the thing, is that's the market. You have to find the market if you want to make a living selling paintings. But I do think that right now, because of, so much online stuff, that there's much more people gaining access to the market through Instagram. And here's the other thing, there's the market of the different types of market. You can be a part of this kind of like high art world market. But personally, I'm not a snob. I do not believe that this market is any like more valuable than any other art market that you may encounter out there. And there may be an art market for you in a coastal city, like that wants to buy landscape paintings. Like that is another market, and just find out which market is the right one for you. Maybe your market is just portraiture, and like you're going to find an online, the market just supports you. Don't worry about which market it is, and find out which market your work is best for, is what I would say. Is that helpful?
I hope so. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer myself. And I'm not a commercial artist in any way. So thank you very much. I really appreciate not only your work, but also the insight and the inspiration. I think we all get it from it.
Thank you. It's really great questions. Very impressive. These are undergrads?
Yep.
Oh, very good.
We are very proud of them.
They're great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Well, I guess that's it. I hope I get to meet you guys in person one day.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.